Experience the life of Jesus in this day he has created and allowed you to exist in. This is episode 1 with my guest, Kurt Alan Schmidt, and together we gather.
Shut up and sit down.
Hey, welcome to In Process, where we gather to remind one another what Jesus has done, what Jesus is doing, and what Jesus will do. People invest in what they believe in, so show us if you believe in what we're doing by clicking that thumbs up. Gather with us regularly by clicking that subscribe button. Enjoy.
Nice. We are rolling, and so welcome to In Process. My name is Chris Van Dyke, and this is my guest, Kurt Alan Schmidt, Kurt Alan Schmidt. He's a platinum preferred customer.
Wow.
What does that even mean? I'm not sure, but I think he's special. How are you today?
Good. It's a good day.
Yeah.
Sunshine, springtime, snow's almost gone.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Are you a seasonal guy? Is seasons, do seasons kind of like throw your mood one way or another, or do you pretty much just love all the seasons? Or
It's funny you should ask, because just today I was with a gentleman and we were talking about the snow on the ground, and I said, as I've gotten older, I love the snow in December before Christmas, but by January I'm kind of hoping it would leave early.
Yeah.
I'm ready for springtime.
Yeah. Does it beat you up at all? Does it bother you, or you just prefer nicer weather? Like, because some people have the seasons actually, they say it's a mood disorder, seasonal mood disorder, I think is what it's called. But
yeah, I'm not afflicted by it. I just think as I've gotten older, there's been a renewal of activities that I started a few years back with walking and hiking and bicycling.
Yeah.
And so I love to hit the bike trails now. And when I left Chippewa Falls, Eau Claire area over 20 years ago to start my first white-collar job or career, there was little or no bike trails around here. So when I came back almost 20 years later, there's all these bike trails, and I'm really enjoying them.
So you say a renewal. What do you mean a renewal?
Well, what I mean by renewal is actually twofold. One, I came back to Christ. As a young man, I kind of thought I knew who Christ was, but as an older man, approaching 50, I really did not know who Christ was. And as of 50, I started to just rediscover him in a whole new way, from a whole new perspective, which was really kind of neat for me. It was both fun and shocking at times for me to rediscover who Christ was and rediscover a newfound faith. Secondly, for me anyway, I went through something very traumatic in my life at 50 years old, which was a separation and divorce from my wife. And the renewal came over a year later, when all of a sudden I found new time fillers than wife and family, so to speak. And I started going out and actually being outside in God's creation, going for bike rides, going for Ice Age trail hikes, walks through, extensive walks through parks, and having a great time with it. Mm-hmm. So it's nice. I wouldn't trade it for anything right now.
So tell me a little bit more about, that was a lot. That was good in just that little short period. So, you had a transformation that occurred, separation, divorce from a wife, a renewal out into nature. It's been both up and down, with a new aspect of your relationship with God through Jesus. What do you want to hit, man? That's a lot. That's good.
Yeah. Well, I guess what I want to hit is for anyone that's either in the process of separation and divorce, or anyone that is freshly divorced. Believe me, you're not expired goods. You're not past your expiration date. Regardless of how you feel about yourself or life at this point, I want to encourage anyone that you're not alone. There's thousands and thousands of people that have gone through divorce, And it is a very, traumatic process for some. It was for me. But as I came to shift my priorities and I guess I would say who and what I believed in, it's become a little bit of a relief for me not to put stock in things that aren't going to be there forever and ever and ever.
What do you mean by that? Things that aren't going to be putting stock in things that aren't going to be there forever and ever and ever.
Well, for those of us who live in America who buy brand new cars or take a 2 or 3 year lease and get a new vehicle every 2 to 3 years, many of us put stock in a vehicle. Many of us put stock in our actual financial portfolios. Many of us put stock in our wives or husbands, our spouses. By stock, I mean we value that. That's what we value. That's what we look up to or idolize, if you will, worship. And for those of us that worship our bank portfolios and our investment portfolios and our retirement accounts and our wives or husbands or a vehicle or a house or something, whatever it is, it's not going to be here. It's only going to be here for as many years as we're allowed to live on the earth. After that, we have a lot more to look forward to.
So have you always believed this? Because like right off the bat, you started off with you want anybody who's gone through a divorce to realize, or is going through one, to realize that they're not expired goods.
They're not past their expiration date.
Is that something that hits close to home for you?
Yeah, for me, I felt as though I kind of felt after the divorce unwanted, unloved, uncared for, and I didn't feel I had a purpose or a value because I didn't have a family to support. I no longer was, no one actually asked me, how are we going to do this? No one really cared about my opinion after this. I was living alone in an apartment. And I remember one night leaving for work. I worked for the state of Wisconsin at that time and got to the hotel. And it was a long journey. When I got there through this horrendous torrential rainfall, normally I would reach for my cell phone and call my wife and tell her that I made it to the hotel okay. Just to let her know I was all right. And when I got checked into my hotel room that night, it was dark and I went to reach, it was raining outside and I went to reach for my phone and I realized there was no one to call. And that was a very powerful moment for me because I realized that the only one I could talk to at that point was Jesus Christ.
So in that moment, tell me a little bit about the process. Like what hit you? What were the thoughts that were going through your head? That moment took you off guard a bit?
Very much so. In the past, whenever I was visiting my parents' house, they would insist at a very young age in our 20s or 30s that when we left to travel away to our homes or school, to our colleges, that we would call them and let them know that we were okay. This continued and transitioned into married life or life with a spouse. And we would insist that each other call and let each other know when we're traveling that we made it to our destination okay. And when you realize that you really don't have anyone to call anymore, post divorce or post separation, very difficult for me. I felt quite alone in the world, and at that point, I didn't feel valued. I didn't feel like what purpose did I serve?
Because that person held the most important place in your life and heart. Is that safe to say?
I would
at that time.
Yeah, yeah. Unfortunately, that was it. I felt she was very important to me.
So when you say unfortunately, let me push back a little bit for people who may be listening, because there's a lot of people, including myself a long time ago, who subscribe to this idea. I don't know, subscribe to an idea that suggests that out of all of our lives, a spouse is the person who should be the most important person in our lives. They are the end all be all to a degree. If you're married, that's what we think, that's a noble thing. And we drop into that hook, line, and sinker. And so that for those of us who did actually think our spouse was everything, why isn't that a good thing? What's the matter with that idea? I think most people would think that's a fine idea. That should be the case.
Yeah, for many years, I always told people, and I guess I would say my father and mother believe the same thing, that a home is where the family is. So if the home is a hotel room, well, I've seen people who have their homes destroyed by fire or a natural disaster with lightning or flooding, and so while their home is being fixed, repaired, or rebuilt, they're living in a hotel or living with other relatives. And I've heard the expression said that the home is where the family is, and I've always subscribed to that. So when I went through a divorce and lost my family and lost my spouse, it was very traumatic because that was home for me.
Mm-hmm. So your spouse was home.
Yeah.
But so going back to the question, you basically at one point in time thought that was what you're supposed to be doing. You were being a good man by treasuring that person and making them everything. And most people would think that that's a good thing, but and that's what you were doing back then. But now, do you believe that same thing? And tell me a little bit about, if you don't, because it kind of seems like you don't today. Why not?
Well, because I've seen a different model now. Been involved, kind of when I was going through this separation divorce, something else was happening in my life where I was starting to be reawakened in what I'll call a body of believers, or what in America we'd call a church. Right or wrong thinking, I really started segueing to the church in a sense of community for support and for fellowship. And because I didn't have that traditional family structure any longer, and all my relatives and mother and father had passed away. So it's very difficult to have a conversation with them beyond the grave. So I really became dependent for a while on what in America we would call a traditional church community, and made several friends and acquaintances, and started being busier, doing more things, filling more time, going to church more, and trying to find out what made me happy, because I wasn't very happy after my spouse and I separated.
Right. And so are you going to this church around the same time that your relationship is straining, or was your relationship over when you started going? Give me a little bit of the process, because we were in the hotel room and you were reaching for your phone, and it just really was devastating to you because you didn't have that anymore, and it took you off guard. And so I'm trying to build out a little bit of an understanding of you seem like a different person today than you maybe were on that day. I don't know, how many years ago was that when you reached for your phone, that day that you reached for your phone?
That would have been the early fall of 2015.
Okay.
So probably early September.
Yeah.
Early to mid-September.
Yeah. And so were you going to this church before that, after that?
Yeah, I would say about 2 years before that. I was attending that church.
So around the same time, your relationship was straining and starting to break apart and buckle under the pressure of different things.
Sure.
You started going to this community of believers. Was that part of the strain of the relationship?
I would love to be able to say yes or no definitively, but I would have to say that it definitely influenced the relationship, because we in the 25 years that we were together, and of course the last 2 were very strained. But of the 23 years before, the communication difficulties and the different perceptions of how we saw things and reacted to things, I would say that neither one of us really actively attended a church or observed prayer or really thought much about Jesus or God, per se. But when I started going back to church and talking with other believers and volunteering time and providing services to the church community, it did kind of produce a strain with her and I. So yeah, I would say that was part of it. I think the biggest part was that my wife went through a stroke, and it was a traumatic time for both of us because of the brain damage that occurred, and she also had related and associated health issues with that, with loss of vision, paralysis, energy, had to go on blood thinners. She was on a high dose of medications, physical therapy, speech therapy, voice therapy. There was a whole host of things that were very difficult for her, and her life changed dramatically.
Mm-hmm.
And during that dramatic change, I believe that she went through, in part, a personality change.
Mm-hmm.
And then it was even more difficult to talk to her and have a conversation because she was very confused, very upset, and very embittered about the health situation. And she really didn't have any place to go with blame, or who could she depend on? Who could she go to for advice? Who could she trust? And because she didn't have her hope in Jesus, and it was very, very difficult for her.
So back then, did you have your hope in Jesus?
I had started down that road. I had started down that road and believed that there was something. Before that, we were what I would call rugged individualists, people who, basically, sucked it up, or, picked yourself up by your bootstraps and went through tough times, and you endured together. I can remember in the past where one or both of us would say, there's not much that we can't take on together. As long as we're together, we can overcome what life gives us. We talked about circumstantial things and I guess what some people would call bad luck or bad circumstances. We looked at that as what life threw at us and how we responded. And so we thought it was a matter of character and planning and intelligence. Really, truly, God gives each one of us specific talents, skills, and abilities that are unique to us and that help us throughout the course of our lives. But again, if you're not trusting, believing, and having faith in Him, we by ourselves can't do anything.
Mm-hmm.
I truly believe now, at 54 years old, that it's not me that made all those things happen over the course of the last 25 years of my life. I believe that God was intimately involved in that.
So during the 2 years of relational strain, though, when your wife at the time was going through that difficulty, she didn't have anybody to look to or lean to. You just started your faith. Were you like fully leaning on Jesus, or were you still leaning on yourself a lot, or were you leaning on her a lot? Were you leaning on your job a lot? All of the above? Like what was happening within you?
I was vehemently praying every day that she would get better.
Mm-hmm.
And regardless of whether the marriage made it or not, I wanted her to get better. I didn't want her to be plagued with all these negative symptoms and all these incapacitating things that directly related back to the stroke.
Mm-hmm.
I was overwhelmed most days. I would have to say way overwhelmed most days with work, bills, taking care of her, and leaning on God as much as I could and not myself. But there's plenty of times when you mistakenly lean on yourself.
Yeah.
And you think, maybe even unconsciously or subconsciously, that you're relying on Him when you're not. And you're really relying on yourself. And when you finally realize it, when you come to realize it, you're like, oh no, I did it again.
Yeah.
I went down this path and it was the wrong path because I thought it was the right path. I didn't pray about it. I didn't
Yeah.
feel led about it, but
Yeah, so I'm kind of getting the idea that there's it sounds like you were leaning on yourself at the time, and the most important thing in your world at that point in time was her well-being.
yeah, that was my primary focus at that time.
And so, if I'm gathering what you've said so far, there's no one else to fixate on their well-being anymore in your life because your relatives are gone, they're passed away, or they're not in your life, and so you have this one person, and this one person's well-being means literally everything to you. It's not just like it's important. Some people would suggest, obviously, that your spouse well-being is important, but for you, it meant everything.
Well, yes, it did. Again, that lifelong philosophy of together we can do anything, and family's the most important thing. When you've lived that out for so many years, it's hard to overnight just let that go. And I think when I think back, I realized she was there through my kidney stones, through gallstones, and through a lot of health issues that I'd had earlier in life. And I just really felt like, as her husband, that I wanted to be there for her.
Yeah.
But again, 3.5 years later, I realized that during that time, God had her, regardless of whether I was there or not.
Yeah.
He had her. I didn't realize it so much at the time.
Right.
I had been her provider. I'd been her confidant. I'd been her partner and friend for almost 25 years.
So is it safe to say that you were trying to be her everything and you weren't supposed to be her everything? And she was your everything and she wasn't supposed to be your everything?
I would say in part that's correct. I'd say that when we started life together 25 years earlier, that we both thought we were each other's everything. I think it would be safe to say that she thought I was her everything, and I would think it would be safe to say that I was, to me, she was my everything.
Because again, I'm just like listening to, how you're articulating your experiences. You reached in your pocket that one night and there was nobody, and that devastated you. And what you were saying earlier is that family gives you purpose, somebody to care for.
Mm-hmm. And to be cared for.
And to be cared for. Yeah. And I personally, I'm not wired that way. Mm-hmm. And so I don't necessarily see things that way.
Sure.
I believe those things are true. Without question, family is a God-designed institution that we can get blessed by tremendously. It can be a tremendous help in time of need, in time of celebration, encouragement, edification. A lot of things happen in families. We multiply and fill the earth through family. There's a lot of things that happen through family.
Be fruitful and multiply.
But the thing that shouldn't happen is that family becomes everything. Because then if family's everything, the most important thing, now we start idolizing our family. And God takes a back seat. And our spouse is in the driver's seat, really, of our lives.
No.
And when that's happening, then we rise and fall with our spouse, right? If our spouse is doing well, we do well. If our spouse isn't doing well, we're not doing well. And in going through a divorce, I imagine if you're thinking that she's everything, a person going through a divorce would think that they're expired goods. What's the purpose? What's the point? If she was your full purpose, if she was your full point, if she was your everything, then post-divorce, what's the point? But I'm sitting in front of a guy who I think has changed a bit in that regard.
been repurposed,
You've been repurposed,
reutilized, refurbished.
refurbished. Indeed, you're being redeemed. And so, how'd that happen? How did a guy? So again, you reached in your pocket. Did you believe your expired goods that day when you reached in your pocket, and it just took you off guard and kind of grabbed hold of you?
There's no doubt. There's no doubt that I felt an incredible, desperate feeling of being alone in the world.
So I want to hear a little bit more about that.
Yeah.
But let's just take care of the sound and the cameras real quick.
Yeah.
All right. So let's pick up where we were.
Sure.
So you reached in your pocket, your world was devastated, and you said you felt very alone at that time.
And I had a desperate question burning in my heart.
Yeah.
Why? Why did all this happen?
Yeah.
Why after 25 years, which 23 of them were pretty darn good. I mean,
Sure,
I once asked my mother on their 50th wedding anniversary about marriage, and she said, once you're married long enough, she said, you'll come to the conclusion that there's going to be good years, there's going to be mediocre years, might even be some bad years. But she said after a period of time, you come to really respect and come to know your spouse and have a deep respect and a deep regard for them, for the body of work that you've done together. And I really don't think that most Americans, including myself, understand a lot about marriage. It's really easy to say, in sickness and in health, for better or for worse, in good times and in bad. It's super easy to say on that wedding day when you're all elated and you're looking forward to life together. And I
remember back when I said that I've been married for over 21 years. And back when I said those vows, I had no idea what those vows meant.
Yeah.
Today, through trial, through fire,
sure,
through a lot of heartache, I totally get it. But back then, I was super clueless. It was I was getting married for me, really. Didn't realize it at the time. Was saying the right things, but
that is
doing
not,
the right things.
that is not what Jesus would have for us.
Yeah.
And actually, through that burning question of why, I went to 4 different churches to try to find that answer.
Mm-hmm.
And I read over 27 books on marriage,
Mm-hmm.
2 of which really made a significant, I made significant discoveries about not only faith, but Jesus Christ's model for us and what he would have for us in marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not anything like most of us would imagine it.
Mm-hmm.
It's an outward love. It's not a love. It's not what I'm going to get out of this. It's what I'm willing to give for however many years we're left together on this earth.
How far past your divorce are you?
We separated in May of 2015, and my divorce was final June 3rd of 2016.
So about 4 years.
Yeah. So
tell me about those 2 books a little bit or something, because the life that's in your eyes, I'm sure there's a lot of people out there who don't understand how you could have life in your eyes, because clearly you're a relational guy. That's coming through very clearly. A person who finds their purpose in the care and consideration of another human, not their job, not their accomplishments, not their IQ, not their power, not their whatever, but in the care of another person. To go through a divorce is a death. I mean, that's if your purpose is in another person, that person goes away, then what's the point? What's the purpose? Like you mentioned,
I would argue that divorce in some ways is harder than death.
Yeah.
If you're married for, let's just say 50 years, and you're still very much in love with your spouse after 50 years of marriage, and the 2 of you are very connected, both spiritually, heartfelt, and you lose that spouse to death, there's a healing process that goes through. And I've watched it with aunts and uncles and
Sure.
mother and father
Yeah.
and grandparents. And I've watched it, And actually, you get to a point, and it takes some people longer than others,
Sure.
but you get to a point where you appreciate the fact that you had all those years with that person, whether it was 20 years, 30 years, et cetera.
Yeah.
And you cherish those memories and you move forward with your life. That's the healthy, that's the healthy way most people do it.
Yeah.
With a divorce, many people, including myself for quite a while, felt like I was thrown away. Felt like I was, put into the garbage can. I was no longer useful. And I was like a can of what was once a really tasty vegetable or fruit. And now the can's expired. The only thing you can do is dump out the rotten fruit and put the can in the recycle bin.
Who did you feel at the time put you in the garbage can? Yourself, your spouse, God, people around you, circumstances, the health issues?
Well, I certainly ask God on many different occasions, and sometimes quite frustrated in frustration, because the more I understood God, or the more I thought I understood God, the more I thought that He was for marriage, that He was a strong proponent of marriage, and that why would He allow a marriage to dissolve like that? Especially after such a traumatic thing as a stroke. I didn't think that was right. I thought the circumstances didn't equal God's love for us. And I couldn't imagine why He allowed something so terrible to occur. And I can honestly say that there were times that during that summer and fall of spring and summer of separation, my spouse would call me on the phone and say, "Would you like to go to the farmer's market this Saturday?" And she'd call on a Wednesday or Thursday evening. And she was living with her parents at this point, and we're living separately. And I'd say, "Are you sure you want to go with me on Saturday morning?" "Well, we always go to the farmer's market. I enjoy going to the farmer's market with you. I think it would be fun. Maybe we could have breakfast afterwards or go down to the gym." And she would segue back to a little bit of her old self. And then I would show up at her mom and dad's house at 8:00 on Saturday morning to pick her up per her request. She would meet me at the door and say, "What are you doing here? Why are you here?" And she would be in her nightgown. And I would say, "Well, you called me on Wednesday or Thursday night and asked me." "No, I didn't. No, I didn't. Why would I do that?" And it was really confusing for her. And it was really hard for me. And I would leave there at a few minutes after 8, feeling dejected, feeling unwanted. And again, the sting of the not being able to understand and communicate well with each other. She actually started keeping a book then on how to, on her appointments and things.
Sure.
And then I would end up going to the farmer's market by myself, or just going home feeling really, depressed and upset, and sometimes in fitful prayer saying, "God, why are you allowing this to happen?" Yeah.
So there's 3 things hanging out there that I'm on the edge of my seat. So there's the why, there's the 2 books. You read 27 books, and 2 of them really stuck out to you. You're 4 years past your divorce and you look like you have life. What's the hope? And so you felt like you were garbage or thrown away. So who threw you away? I don't know. I feel like I didn't hear that quite yet. And so whatever you want to answer first, or go into a little bit.
Well, let me just say that when you put your hope and your belief in what Hollywood would define as love, how many movies have we all watched where a person can't be happy until they fall in love with their perfect soulmate that's out there? Yeah. Because gosh almighty, Hollywood describes each and every person as having one soulmate.
Yeah.
There's not a dozen, there's only one.
Yeah.
And so if you're lucky enough to meet your perfect soulmate, it's got to work, because they go off in the end, and it's assumed that they're going to lead a happy, loving life.
Yeah, it's incredibly exploitative. It sells a lot of movies, but it damages a lot of people who believe it, for sure. It's a terrible philosophy.
And it isn't that way in reality.
No.
Over half the marriages that occur in the United States typically end in divorce within 7 to 10 years.
Yeah, I think the statistics are even higher than that at this point. But
Yeah.
so what books, like, you read 27 books. Let's hit that one first. You read 27 books.
27 books.
And there's 2 books that like seem to have had some impact on transforming you, finding healing, something.
Yeah.
Because you don't seem like a man who believes he's expired. I mean, you just proclaimed a little bit ago that you've been repurposed.
I did for a while.
Yeah, you did for a while. But like,
Yeah.
so what happened? Like, how were you, and why are you not any longer? What changed?
I would start with this. As I was going through that divorce back in 15, one of the last things my wife told me before her stroke was the fact that she thought we were both leading sedentary lives. In other words, we were putting in too many hours at work, and we weren't, in our younger days when we first met, we were doing things like fishing, canoeing, hiking, camping, bicycling together, and we were active. We were both physically active. And as we got older and our careers took off after our education, she went to Chippewa Valley Technical College and I graduated from UW-Eau Claire. We both had rewarding, what we felt were rewarding careers. And after that, we started to realize that we were putting on some weight. We had some health issues. We weren't as physically fit, and we weren't really feeling well. I mean, even though other aspects of life were going well, we weren't feeling well. In and of the food we were eating, the things we were consuming, and the things we were drinking, they just weren't healthy. We had too much sugar in our diets, and caffeine especially was a big no-no for both of us. Her for coffee and me for soda. And we decided to start making some changes, and we talked about it. And that was her big thing for me. She wanted me to lose some weight, get back in shape, and be the younger, youthful, more capable man that I was, when we first met. And I agreed with her. So we went back to the gym and started working out in the second half of February 2014. And within 5.5 months, I lost 74 pounds. And it was fantastic. I started to feel great. Unfortunately, during that time, she had her stroke, stopped going down to the gym, was on blood thinners and a host of other medications the doctors had for her. I continued forward after the separation, hoping that we would reconcile. And the weekend after Labor Day of 2015, she served me with divorce papers personally at our duplex, which was still in both of our names. I didn't take it. I didn't make any preparations to take that out because I was truly believing that God would reconcile this marriage. And when I got the divorce papers, that was probably the last day that I went down to the gym. I literally ate and drank myself to death for the next year or so of my life. And it was very difficult for me to get what I would call as a foothold of hope, because at the time I was still disappointed that I thought I knew better than what God literally had a plan for me. And apparently it wasn't marriage. And if that was his plan, I wasn't accepting it. I thought he should have healed my marriage, and I was asking why. And I also wanted to know why my marriage failed in the first place, because up until just a year or two before we actually went through the divorce hearing, we were relatively happy. We hardly ever argued or said a harsh word to one another. So it came as a complete and utter surprise for me. I was taken aback. And at that point, I realized that there were smarter people out there and more spiritual people out there than myself. Several of the books that I read, I checked out from either the Chippewa or the Eau Claire Library at the time, and I had time on my hands, and I started reading then. And as I had more time, I started reading. I started writing more, putting out thoughts out there. That was very therapeutic for me, to be able to express my feelings and my emotions in in thought, in short stories and in poetry form. And that really helped. Since that time, I've shown a little bit of that writing out to a few people, and they felt it was profound in certain ways, especially for those that were troubled with loss or something as serious as divorce. So that really helped, and God allowed me that outlet. I believe now that God allowed me those outlets. One of the books that was really influential was, and I'm sure that the Holy Spirit really led me to this through a set of circumstances that before I came back to Christ and had the kind of belief and faith and trust that I have today, I truly believe I would have called that just circumstantial or fate, but I don't believe that anymore. I think that truly the Holy Spirit led me to that book through that Sunday morning of circumstance and mishap after mishap after mishap that brought me to that place where I found out about that book. And I actually purchased the book that day, went home, did not go to service that day. I was planning on going to service that Sunday morning, and went home and read the first 2 chapters and was completely blown away on what I discovered about what Timothy Keller and his wife have to say about marriage. And it comes from a perspective, it comes from a godly perspective. And it was really interesting because in his parish, he has approximately 5,000 people in his congregation at one time, and found out that 2/3 of his congregation basically, or at least half of his congregation wasn't married, and they were young people under the age of 35. And he couldn't understand why these people weren't married. And when he actually looked into it, he found out that many of them were living together and cohabitating. Many of them didn't want marriage. They were scared or leery of marriage,
Or had been damaged by it, right?
or had been previously damaged at a much younger age from it. And he started looking into it, and he actually started a set of sermons on marriage and educating people to let them know that in God's eyes, not the world's eyes, but in God's eyes, marriage was actually a preparation to be with him through eternity, past this life, because this life is temporary. We have eternity to look forward to as believers. And in that, I don't know how to best say it, but in that marital relationship, if it's a godly one, and we're following his tenets and what he would command for us, it truly is a preparation of outward love, of expressing outward love and sacrificial love, and what we would euphorically call unconditional love, which is truly the love of Christ. Yeah,
and I imagine that. So what's the name? So it's a book written by Timothy Keller.
The Power of Marriage.
It's called The Meaning of Marriage.
The Meaning of Marriage.
The Meaning of Marriage.
Yep.
And it's written by both Timothy and his wife, right? Timothy and Kathy Keller.
Kathy is dedicated to one chapter, and she has some excerpts in other chapters where she brings out other concepts. Yes.
Yeah, and I've heard Timothy speak before, and he credits, though her name isn't on the books, she's the author of many of his books, is how he said it, something to that degree.
That's great.
Yeah. But so Timothy Keller and The Meaning of Marriage was one of the books that helped reorient your understanding of what actually a marriage is. And so there's some beliefs that must have changed or been transformed through reading that book that you had held before that you realized weren't true, or were there some bondages that you got broke free from, because again, we're going back to that phone call in the pocket that you're just devastated by. You were taken off guard. Sounds to me like a person whose hope is really in something temporal rather than eternal.
Yeah.
Though you may have started to be a believer at that time, believed in God, but really you believed in your marriage. And that's what your hope was in.
Sure.
And so when that started breaking apart, and then there wasn't somebody to care for, and consider and all that, you felt like you're expired and you'd been thrown in the garbage or whatever. So then today you don't feel like, it doesn't seem like that. So there's some beliefs that must have changed within you to allow you to go from being an expired human to a repurposed human.
Sure.
And you found some of that in that book.
Sure. And I would back up just a little bit and say that when I first met my spouse, and we were originally dating, one of the things that we found attractive about each other was that we were very supportive of one another. And we felt like our friendship that we started with and the loyalty that we had for each other, those words meant a lot to us at the time. And we both, I would say that each one of us had a very traumatic childhood, in similar ways. And when we didn't always feel like we had support, we didn't always feel like we had encouragement, and we didn't always feel like we were valued. And that's one thing that I think we gave to each other, was we made each other feel valued. We affirmed each other, and we truly were loyal and realized and saw each other's needs and responded to them. And so that kind of support, when we talk about a support system, whenever someone's going through from the world's view, when someone's going through a traumatic time or a traumatic season of circumstance, people always ask, a lot of people always ask, well, do you have a support structure? Do you have someone you can talk to? Do you have this, or do you have that? Or do you have someone who cares about you, that can help you, that can be there with you, can stand with you and support you?
You felt you did.
And I felt I did.
Yeah.
And that's all I felt I needed at 26 years old when we met.
Right.
Because I had never had that before. I had girlfriends, but not with this type of deep meaning that we had.
Sure.
And I felt that was something, again, the soulmate situation, where I finally found the one for me.
Yeah.
And all the others were great to meet, but this was the one.
Yeah.
And it was traumatic when years later we started to discover that we weren't so perfect, and that we did do things that weren't
supportive.
And that were frustrating each other at times.
Yeah.
But we got through it. And the thing that this book really brought out, for me anyway, was it freed me from some of the obligatory things that I felt I had failed at. I had felt there were things that I may have failed her with, or that I didn't measure up to, or that I wasn't consistent enough. And when I read this book, I said, wow, this isn't all on my shoulders. This isn't all on her shoulders.
Sure. And
it not only freed me from some unforgiveness that I didn't really realize that I had deep in my heart, for the way that we departed each other.
Yeah.
But it also helped me to see past the guilt, the regret, the remorse that I'd been living with subconsciously. And when I got rid of that, and I realized that I could now move forward, and that there was nothing holding me back but me. Truly, there wasn't anything holding me back but me. Mm-hmm. God wanted more for me than just to sit there and watch television for my non-working hours and to eat and drink myself to death.
Yeah.
He wanted something else for me. And that's when I started bicycling, started going fishing, started hiking, started seeing more and more blue sky and white clouds and beautiful, beautiful scenery.
Yeah.
And realized that there was more to life than just work and supporting a family. So it was incredible. And God showed me that, not immediately, but he opened my eyes to it. And as I discovered it, and as I was blessed by it, I realized that spouses are great. I have whether you're married or not.
Yeah.
I still have days, especially at Christmas time, where I feel alone. There's no one to decorate a tree with.
Yeah.
There's no one to wrap presents or open presents with on Christmas Day.
Yeah.
There's no one to sit by the hearth and talk with at Christmas time. But regardless, is that really true? because you can talk to God 24/7, 365, and on a leap year, you get an extra day. So, I mean, you can talk to God at any time. I can sit up on Christmas Eve as late as I want after midnight and talk to him if I want to.
Yeah.
So what's holding me back? But again, there's those people that would call in and say, "Oh, Kurt, are you really being truthful? Because wouldn't you love something a little bit more tangible? Wouldn't you love someone, and yes, the answer is yes. We're all made of flesh, blood, and bone, right?
Yeah.
And I would love to have a companion. I'd love to have someone that I felt really connected to go through life with. But if God has that for me, that's great. But I'm not going to go on 50 dating sites and Craigslist and ask my pastor or reverend or priest to look for someone for me or let friends set me up blind dates. If it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, it doesn't,
Well, and you're submitting yourself to the eternal pastor today.
Yeah.
Right. And so like Jesus is pastoring you, because like you can't, you're sitting here testifying to a God who really moved you into a relationship with him and has healed you. And though you went through a lot of pain and turmoil, that I still think it'd be really great to get into some of the inner workings of why you got to that place and what got you out of that place. But it's really obvious that God has done some deep, deep transforming and restoration in your heart and in your life and in your belief of what constitutes living and life and what meaning. And those are huge.
Yeah, and it's not. It's not about salary. It's not about how much we make, how big our home is, or how many cars we have in the garage.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So in a few minutes, we'll wrap this up and pick it up next time. But in a few minutes, then. So if it's not about those things, which you clearly used to believe, what's it about?
It's not about traveling somewhere late at night and getting to your destination through a terrible rainstorm and not having anybody to call, because while you're in that rainstorm on your way to that hotel, you can pray and he's right there with you and he'll join you right where you're at. Right on that rainy road where you can barely see the center line and you've got 20 more miles to go to get to the hotel. He's right there with you. But it is comforting. I will say this much. It is comforting to have someone to call and let them know that, hey, I made it.
Yeah, but somehow this God who some people say exists, some people say don't, doesn't exist. And you sounds like maybe you thought that he could exist, but you weren't really like calling on him in the middle of the rainstorm. You're calling on your significant other, but now you believe. It's clear in your testimony and your eyes and your expression and that you believe that it is worthwhile to have a relationship with God that goes back and forth. So I want to hear next time some how that happened. There's a lot of people who have a lot of doubt and a lot of questions, and you might have been one of those people not that long ago. But here you are sounding like a man who is pretty convinced that he has a pretty good relationship with the God of the universe.
Yep.
And that's pretty fascinating.
And I know we're going to stop here for now and pick it up later. But for those that are listening and that do hear this podcast or this discussion that we're having today, I pray and hope that for each one of you that have gone through divorce, for each one of you that are in the middle of a separation, or even a loss of a loved one, like a mother or father or a wife or husband, I hope that you know that through those circumstances, through those dark days, through that mourning, if you will, that grieving process, that there's better times ahead. So hang on. Don't go to the tequila bottle. Don't go to the tequila bottle. Don't go to the drugs. Don't sleep 20 hours a day in depression. He's there for you. And if you'll go to him, he's the source for healing. He's the source for truth. And he won't allow you to continue to lie to yourself, let others lie to you, and for you or your heart to deceive yourself into thinking that you're worthless and that what value do you have because your spouse divorced you,
Yeah.
or your loved one died.
Yeah.
So now you're alone in the world and you don't serve a purpose anymore.
Feeling provoked, angered, encouraged, inspired by what you heard? Don't keep it to yourself. Comment below. Put your supportive beliefs into action by clicking all the clicky stuff. Lastly, gather with those around you and remind one another what Jesus has done, is doing, and will do.